The buses will continue to be very important in our hub and spoke. Today, you're really looking at about maybe 5.5 million journeys, of which about 60% are using buses. I want to see, if possible, more predictable journeys. Okay? And more predictable journeys is not just only working on it in terms of the capacity end, but also what we do on the roads. Okay, so we've introduced dedicated lanes for buses. We've introduced full-day bus lanes over the years. We need to think through what more can we do, bearing in mind that there are also trade-offs, that there are other road users. What we are looking at is firstly, it is what is the next level of service standard we are expecting? What's the next QoS? So that's a major part at the heart of the comprehensive review that we are talking about. And then to translate that into how many more buses, how many more bus captains. And third of it is what additional infrastructure, because you need maybe more interchanges, but certainly more depots, and how to bring that about, particularly given the constraint in land space. But my belief coming into the job, and certainly it has not diminished in the last few months, is that unless we step in, the changes are not going to happen fast enough. And we step in, first of all, by saying, is the QoS today adequate? If not, how else ought we to improve it? What are the implications, therefore, in terms of number of buses and bus captains? And then, how do we pay for this and bring it about? LTA is working through this, also working through with the operators as to the kind of improvements that can be made, because that is indeed one point of feedback that we should also take into account. Different indicators that we have today, for example, your headway indicators, your congestion levels. I mentioned previously, and I think this still is valid, that we need to improve capacity, we need to improve frequency, and we need to improve reliability. Today, as a short-term measure, we are delaying the retirement of buses, and that will increase capacity by 5 to 6%. But that's not a long-term solution. The long-term solution is more buses that are going to be elderly-friendly, low floorboard, buses that over time are going to be greener, because I think that's the direction that we want to move towards as well. The other thing is actually also to do so at selected bus stops that we are converting into bus hubs. Right? I think that was also mentioned earlier. We have trialed it. We are now ready to roll this out to, I think, about 35 bus stops that we're converting to bus hubs over the course of the next 1-2 years. Basically, the intent is to identify, and we have done so, very heavily used bus stops where actually you find that there are buses queuing just to discharge passengers, and this adds to the journey time. So by lengthening the bus bay where it is possible to do so, extending the shelters, and also using more of the space to provide information on bus panels, I think it would help the commuter somewhat. First, we want to complete the comprehensive review that I was talking about, and then we would go on and look again at the bus tendering. But now, not so straightforward a process, even though I think conceptually it is the right thing to do, and that ought to be the way to go, because it is actually packaging the bus routes and putting it out for tender that is quite difficult. There are certain routes that are obviously very lucrative. There are certain routes that, given a choice, the operators would not want to run buses on, and they are required to do so because of universal service obligations. And then there are those that are break-even, more or less. There are routes that, because they are lucrative, they are used to cross-subsidize other routes that are not profitable and actually on their own would not have been commercially viable. For example, some of the trunk routes. And therefore, when you put up that package for competitive tendering, it's got to encapsulate some of all these different types of routes, all right, in order to make sure that it is a package that generally makes sense. It is a package also that on its own, taken out, does not affect the viability of the rest of the network. All right. So those are some of the challenges. Today, what we have is a fairly mature bus network already. All right. And so any changes that you make to it, any tweaks, including rerouting and so on, the repercussions, I think, have to be properly understood. And because commuters are affected on a daily basis, and many of them are affected, you've got to think through whether, on balance, it is worth the while to make those changes. All right. So we are still looking at bus, tendering out a package of routes for competition, but I would not want to commit on the timeline until we are very sure that we have gotten it more or less right.